2, 3, 4. Let me tell you about PuckPedia. Stats, contracts, and caps. It's all there for you. One-stop shop for your hockey information. It's a hockey sensation. So log on, log on, log on. If you give a puck, go to PuckPedia.com.
Welcome to PuckPedia Cap Central. It is Thursday, January 22nd. I am your host, Keith Kavanaugh, and we have a new person in the color analyst position today for us. It is former Florida Panthers assistant general manager Steve Warrior, who is taking over for Hart today. Hart couldn't make it, so we got Steve to fill in, which I'm super excited about. Steve, how you doing?
Great, Keith. How are you?
I'm pumped to have you on. Maybe we'll get some actual good takes this week, unlike when we have Hart on. No, just kidding, Hart. You do a great job, and Steve's excited to fill in for us. We had a really, really kind of busy week in terms of movement around the NHL. A lot of rumors floating around. We got, this Olympic freeze coming up that's almost like a pseudo first mini pre-trade deadline situation going on. I don't know about you, but what's catching your eye right away before we kind of get into everything?
Yeah, we've had some trades the last few days. It's always interesting to see who wants to move fast rather than waiting through the break. People change their minds as time goes on. And I think the last couple of years, you've seen some teams try to be proactive, realizing add some pieces earlier, get them assimilated into the club, maybe, bank some more points if you're in a tight race. Thought keeps sticking, and we'll see what keeps happening.
We shall see indeed. Let us fire up the first big move that happened on Sunday. It was the Calgary Flames and the Vegas Golden Knights made a trade for Rasmus Andersson, kind of the first domino to fall in terms of big trade pieces for pending UFAs coming aboard. So Rasmus Andersson was acquired by the Vegas Golden Knights, 50% salary retention. So he has a $2.275 million cap hit on the season. And then Calgary in return gets Zach Whitecloud, $2.75 million cap hit this year through 27-28 season, a 2027 first, a 2028 second that becomes a 2028 first if Vegas wins the Stanley Cup this year, and prospect Abram Wiebe. So this move actually gives Vegas some cap room, surprisingly, due to the retention. So Vegas has a net cap space of $475,000. Anderson's 29 years old, pending UFA. He has 30 points in 48 games this year. I would say a legit 2 to 3D kind of on a contending team. Steve, what are your thoughts on the return here? Andersson was unwilling to do an extension with anyone right now, so that took some teams out of the mix and maybe limited the return Calgary could get for him.
Yeah, I think this is one of those rare win-win trades that make for bad radio fodder, but help both teams. Look at Vegas, like you said, you're adding a top 2-3D, but also a guy who plays in all situations. He's tough. He can quarterback a power play. He's term limited, but that also minimizes the risk. And I think Vegas has earned the comfort of having been able to recruit a lot of high-end players over the last few years to not be overly concerned about that. In terms of the acquisition cost, they didn't subtract anything from their active roster other than another defenseman who's arguably a substitute for him in Whitecloud. So they undoubtedly got better, gave up a couple high picks in the future, but, those picks are probably going to be in the bottom third of the draft with how Vegas has done recently. And even if they aren't, and not that you should necessarily conflate two separate transactions, but, they acquired Mitch Marner for free in the summer, other than, aside from the $120 million of salary.
And Waugh, a sign and trade, right? Technically,
and Nick Waugh, but other than that, you didn't give up major draft capital. You acquired a game-changing forward, and now you're acquiring, like you said, a real high-end defenseman as well. So, makes sense for Vegas. When having been on the other side of making deals, you always think about if we don't get this player, who's the next best player we can get, and what would it cost? And I think when it comes to a high-end D like Rasmus Andersson, who's on an expiring contract, I can't think off the top of my head who the next best would be, and it certainly wouldn't be a better asset. So good on them for moving on him. And from Calgary, like you said, when you have a player who can call the shots on where he does and doesn't go, that massively affects his market value. So they did well. They moved fast. They monetized the asset before something might happen, injury or otherwise, that could hurt them. I think it'll be interesting to see what they do with Whitecloud. He's a good player. He fits in well with them, but if you're Craig Conroy and you take the position, maybe that we're still a few years away from our contending window, and we might also be moving out players like Nazem Kadri right now. you might be able to turn around with the White Cloud for another first and then some. But either way, good trade for both teams. And yeah.
Yeah, and I was listening to Craig Conroy. He went on the fan hockey show with Mike Futa and Matt Marchese the other day, and he was basically saying how, once it was news came out that Rasmus Andersson from his agent Claude Lemieux was not willing to sign an extension with any team, that some teams were immediately like just taken out from that because that was the only condition that they were really interested in that player. So think probably Boston, probably Detroit. Especially if Yzerman was only interested in an extension with if Quinn Hughes for the Quinn Hughes trade, like Anderson probably 100% in that same boat. And Vegas is a team where they know Rasmus Andersson like really wanted to go there. That's not been a secret. And they weren't concerned about getting the deal done because the same situation happened with another Calgary Flames defenseman and Noah Hannafin. And I think Elliot Friedman was saying on 32 Thoughts, it took 35 days from the trade to get that extension done. So that's what he's setting the over under at. And from the Flames side too, right? Rasmus Andersson in the Olympics. So injury definitely possible when he plays for Team Sweden during that time period. But then also he was like, we're playing him 24, 25 minutes a night. He's blocking shots for us. Like the injury risk is just too high to not get this deal done, especially if you know he's not going to re-sign with your team. Like you have to get this done. And the return they got, could be 2 first-round picks, could be a guy who turns into another first-round pick. So really good piece of business done for Calgary.
Yeah, I agree on all that. And Calgary does right by the player. They do right by the agent, which shouldn't always be a driving consideration, but newish GM like Craig Conroy always helps to build up that goodwill and capital around the league, and I think he played it well.
Exactly. Like you never know when those agents you're gonna have to deal with them again in the future. So always good to have them on your good side. Let us move into the next big trade that happened the next day, I believe it was, and that's Kiefer Sherwood. Steve was calling this one from the beginning. He was saying that Kiefer is going to go to the Sharks, and that's exactly what happened. The return on this one was interesting. So Sherwood was acquired for a 2026 second, a 2027 second, and Cole Clayton, who is a 25-year-old AHL kind of player. Sherwood's having a great year, right? He's 30 years old. He's a pending UFA, 17 goals, 6 assists, 23 points in 44 games. He's also second in the NHL in hits after being first last year by over 100 hits. So a guy who really plays a physical brand of hockey. Very solid middle six player. The Sharks are basically saying, we're not selling anymore. We're gonna go for it a little bit. We're gonna give this group some sort of confidence that we're excited and we're happy with where they are as a group by making this kind of move. From the Vancouver side of things, it seemed like they really wanted a first-round pick for Sherwood, and it sounds like the agent kind of stepped in a little bit. And once they were like, what, if you soften this price a little bit, I think you're going to be able to make this trade very easily. And that's kind of what happened. So I guess from your side, Steve, like, first off, what are your thoughts on San Jose kind of making a move like this when they aren't necessarily in their contention window, but they're playing probably better than a lot of people expected? And then on the flip side, how do you think Vancouver did with that return for a guy who's a pending UFA, but he's on a really, really good, $1.5 million deal and no extension in place?
Yeah, for San Jose, like I'll steal a line from the baseball world here, but if you're Mike Greer and the Sharks, like how can you not be romantic about hockey right now? Like Macklin Celebrini is potentially a historic, generational, pantheon type player. And if you think about those players who have come through the game, like people still write books and make movies and whatever, do documentaries about every year of those great players' careers and what it was like their first, second, third year in the league. And so if you're Mike Greer sitting there and you can make some moves that don't radically alter your future prospects, but give Macklin Celebrini and Will Smith and that team a chance to make the playoffs, you do that every day of the week because they've earned it. And it's a hockey decision, but it's also just like, borderline magic at this point with that team. And, from a playoff standpoint, even if they don't make it, 2 things. One, they made the deal early, which adds a lot of value. If you're adding a valuable asset to a team that's fighting for a playoff spot, it's a lot better to do that deal now than at the deadline.
It's so much better to integrate a player like that when you got 25, 30 games to work with, as opposed to after the trade deadline when you have maybe 10 to 15 games. Like I always think there's a lot of value in doing it well before the trade deadline.
Yeah, and it's not just integrating; it's you got to bank points. So that makes sense. And also, the value of allowing this team and these players to play competitive, meaningful games in February, March, and April certainly has some value to it as well, even if they don't ultimately make it. So, cost wasn't prohibitive. Sherwood's a good, useful player. He's particularly useful, I think, on a San Jose team that isn't as deep. So I think Kiefer Sherwood's value to maybe San Jose is more than Colorado, say, where he might play less. The bigger question hanging over this all is what will San Jose do with Sherwood for an extension? So we're seeing some speculation here and there of does he want 25 million or 30 million on a 5 or 6 year deal? And I was talking to somebody pretty close to the Sharks last night, and they made a comment along the lines of, well, we have so much cap space, if it's 5.5, that's fine. We can play with it. And yes and no, I never like that sort of thinking because
I don't either. I don't like that thought process.
Yeah, cap space is always valuable, and especially future cap space when you can never predict what's going to happen 2-3 years out. You do know Macklin Celebrini is going to be, maybe a $20 million player. Will Smith might be a $15 million player. And beyond that, you might, with those two players in the fold, be able to attract 2 or 3 more really high-end guys who might be available on the market in the next year or two. So to, be a little liberal with your cap space and sign someone for a little more than you maybe should on a 4 or 5 year deal, that could lead to some tougher decisions than you need down the line. So I do think they have to be judicious about what they do with Sherwood. As useful as he is, as good of a year as he's having, as much as he brings with his style of play, I don't think it's a terrible rule for a team starting off with 1 and probably 2 high-end franchise type players to say, let's just keep it simple. Let's let's minimize regret, and let's not sign anyone to a deal in excess of X years or X dollars a year, unless this is a player we deem foundational. Again, taking nothing away from Sherwood. So interesting what they do with him, but in any event, good trade for them to add him at this time for that cost to this club right now.
Let me ask you a quick question before we take a look at the Vancouver side of things here. Do you think the Sharks are going to regret more if they make this move and then let him walk at the end of this deal, knowing the acquisition cost they paid, or if they go ahead and sign him, but to a deal that either has too much term or too much AAV that kind of hamstrings them, let's say at 2, 3, 4 years from now?
Yeah, let's talk about the acquisition cost, though. I don't think it was high. Luke Shen last year went for what, a second and a fourth, and Kiefer Sherwood 1.15 on a 30-goal, 4 zillion hit pace, went for 2 seconds. So it wasn't prohibitive. San Jose's had a lot of picks. Again, they're allowed to, throw a couple of their lower dollar value chips into the table now. I think it was a move. And you can't look at that move in hindsight and say, oh, we missed by 2 points, or, oh, we signed Sherwood after that. That's an isolation. The transaction was traded for him at this point in time for these assets. And I don't think it was cost prohibitive. I think the bigger question for them is going to be if they keep winning or other teams, around them don't, do they add more? Who else might be out there, whether it's a Dougie Hamilton or someone else to complement that roster and, keep them in the fight. But
Dougie's staying in New Jersey. Stop.
Anyway, so from the Vancouver side, it's fine. If you're going to trade a player and get 2 second-round picks, get it from a team who might be not, drafting 28th or 29th in the next 2 years. That's right. Not on thought or anything. It's okay. I think on the long list of things the Vancouver Canucks fan base should be angry about, and that list is long. This isn't one of them. 2 picks are good. And again, the more intriguing thing for Vancouver is what do they do with those picks? Because we saw last year they traded an asset, acquired a first-round pick, and played hot potato with it and flipped it right away for a veteran expiring defenseman who they then extended for a big long-term deal, and then months later decided to do a rebuild or hybrid retool or whatever it is. I think it was a good deal for Vancouver. They, again, sort of like we talked about, they moved out an asset just like Calgary did and made sure to monetize it for picks sooner than later. And the more intriguing thing is, what do they do next?
Exactly. It's not one move in the grand scheme of things. It's got to be does this make directional sense with the moves they make after this kind of move? And so we'll see how all that plays out. They got some guys who have signed extensions but don't have any trade protection, and the extensions haven't even kicked in yet. So we'll see how that all plays out for the Vancouver Canucks. Let us move into a signing that happened yesterday. News broke last night that Josh Doan, the son of Shane Doan, former Coyotes great, signed a pretty good extension with the Buffalo Sabres. This is Jarmo Kakalainen's first real piece of business on the hockey side of things. He extended Doan 7 years, $48.65 million, an AAV of just under 7 at $6.95 million. It's about 6.7% of the projected cap next season, takes him all the way to UFA at age 31. For this deal, I think, there's some structure to it. So the first 2 years has a $3.5 million signing bonus. And then the years 3 through 7 is just full base salary. No trade protection, obviously, in the first 3 years because they're still RFA years. But then in years 4 to 7, he has a 7-team no trade list. And like we mentioned, he was traded from Utah in the offseason in the JJ Peterka deal, along with Michael Kesselring. And Josh Doan has just fit in like an absolute glove to this Buffalo Sabres team. He has 35 points in 49 games this year. He has a greater than 50% expected goal share and goals for share. He has the best expected goal share of any Buffalo Sabres forward this season. He's currently playing on line one with Tage Thompson and Alex Tuck and getting some power play 1 minutes as well. I think this is a great piece of business because they got it done early before the price kind of keeps going up. And I think that number is going to age really, really nicely with the Sabres contention window and like how they view the age of their core, but then also like where the salary cap is going, keeping that under $7 million for a guy like this, I just think makes a ton of sense. So Steve, why don't you tell us what you think of the deal and how you think this is kind of going to shape what the Sabres do maybe at the trade deadline and, in the offseason?
Yeah, I love the deal. I mean, hats off to Josh Flynn. He's the new AGM in Buffalo who came in with Yarmo. It's a great deal. It's the exact type of deal a team like Buffalo or any team in the league should be signing, right? Young player, effective. He's good at both ends of the ice. He scores goals. He's young. Given his family background, he probably isn't the type of player who's going to have trouble adapting to being sort of a spotlight type of guy with a big ticket attached to him. His dad's been there before. So exactly what Buffalo should be doing. They should be signing him as soon as they can, which is what they did. And the structure of the contract's fantastic. Modified no trade is crucial. I've negotiated contracts like that, where typically there is a lot of agent pushback, at first for a no move, but also for a more onerous no trade. And those are the type of agreements where the headline won't be like, what is the trade protection, right? The headline is how long and how much. But if you're thinking long term, which someone like Josh is, and I'm sure Yarmo as well, those are the type of little things that add massive value to a club. And I'll use an example. Like one transaction I spent a ton of time working on a number of years ago was Jonathan Huberdeau's extension. Similar type of high-end foundational player. And I negotiated with Alan Walsh, Jonathan's agent, for a long time on the structure, and we settled on the deal being 6 years. It was 5.9 per year, which at the time was the same as we were negotiating with Barkov. But a huge bone of contention was Joe had a no trade that we were giving him for his first UFA years of that deal, like Josh here. And the argument was, should we allow the player to have a full no trade or a no move in the final year of that deal? And on one side of that argument is, A, he's a great player. We can't imagine we'd ever trading him. 2, it's 7 years out. We might not even be there by then. Do we even care? Let's just get the signing done. But on the other hand, and where I landed on this, and it took up a lot of my summer negotiating it with Alan, but I think it worked out, it was crucial to make sure we had trade flexibility in that final season, where if we didn't think we'd be extending that player, either because he was too good and too expensive or because we thought we'd move on for other reasons, we needed that flexibility. And you saw the opposite last year with Mitch Marner in Toronto, where it had a very different result. But with Huberdeau, that 6-year deal kept in, and people probably forgot about the no trade. But by year 6, when he wasn't going to be extended, he was able to be flipped by Bill Zito for Matthew Tkachuk. And if he had a no move, that result may not have happened.
And how did that work out for Florida?
I think okay, but conversely, you'll get Marner. Marner, with a lack of that clause, would have probably got the Leafs Mikko Rantanen.
Yep.
So, hats off to Josh Flynn, hats off to Josh Doan too for being paid. But structure is important. This is a deal that's structured really, really well. Good player, good ticket. And notwithstanding giving a lot of credit to Yarmo and Josh Flynn for negotiating this deal and a nice, tidy piece of work, do we also want to ask, will Kevin Adams be the first fired GM to be nominated for the Jim Gregory Award? Because that
trade is looking better and better each day.
Yeah, team's doing well. They haven't added anyone since he left. The win streak started before he left, so it's a fun one. Anyway, but yeah, no, great signing, good work. Love the structure, love the player. Good job.
Yeah, I love the part where you're bringing up about the trade protection. I think that's super interesting because the last year of the deal is kind of the big, inflection point of like, are we going to extend this player? Are we going to try to flip him for assets? Like, what are we going to do? And you'll see what's going on with the Devils right now. And I know Dougie's not on the last year of his deal, but it's the same trade clause throughout the final years. And so 7 teams, when you're in, years 4 through 7, let's say Buffalo has another unfortunate turn of events and they kind of start stinking again. 7 teams is very easy to get around, and you have 24 other teams to work with on a trade. So yeah, hats off to the Sabres. I think it's a great deal in terms of the turn and the AAV, but then also that trade protection and that structure that you're talking about.
Yeah, 100%.
Let us keep on moving here. So we're going to talk about the New York Rangers. They released a fun letter last week where Chris Drury basically came out and said that the team is going to go through a retool, that they were very specific, not mentioning the rebuild word. Basically, it came out after the letter that they talked to Panarin and they will not be issuing him a contract extension offer moving forward, and that he's going to work with his agent to facilitate a trade because Artemi has a full no trade clause in his contract, which, opposite of what you were talking about there. He's got full protection, full control over where he ends up playing this season and where he maybe wants to extend moving forward. But there's a bunch of other players that can kind of be on the move as well. And Steve, so if we want to look at like the Rangers here, just like who could possibly like be on the move. So we mentioned Panarin's got a full no trade protection, but he's got 11.6 million AAV, probably looking at a 50% retention on that. So teams have to absorb about $5.5 to $6 million there. Lafreniere is interesting because he's in the first year of his deal, and he has no trade protection because he's still in his RFA year, so he could actually be moved wherever. And so that's an interesting one if teams value that he's locked in long term. He hasn't turned out to the normal number 1 overall pick that you expect, but a winger, $7.45 million, if he can be just a little bit under a point per game production and maybe get some power play one time, like that could be a deal that turns out. Vincent Trocheck's the most interesting one because he's a center iceman who has another 3 years on his deal at a reasonable $5.6 million, plays penalty kill, plays power play, has a modified no trade clause in his deal. So it'll be interesting to see if he's a guy that the Rangers go to and ask either to waive it or to go to one of his accepted preferred teams. But yeah, I mean, like Braden Schneider's also interesting. He's an RFA at the end of the season. He might not be a guy the Rangers see in their future. Brennan Othman, who's a guy they also had a first-round pick a couple years back, who just hasn't materialized into consistent NHL minutes and a consistent NHL player. And he's a guy maybe you look at like a Igor Chinnikov, who recently got a change of scenery from Columbus to Pittsburgh, and he looks like he's kind of taken that and running with it. So maybe Othman's in a similar boat where he just needs a change of scenery. The core for this team, you'd imagine, is going to be Shesterkin, Fox, Gavrikov, Mika and Miller, and the last two mostly just due to their contracts, although Mika actually might be a little appealing now given his most recent play and the rise in the cap. But yeah, let's also pull up this tweet here, Brian, so we can kind of get Steve's view on this. But this is something Steve likes. So in the most recent episode and for the New York Post with Molly Walker and Brian Boyle, had a great analogy for Artemi Panarin. If your house has a leaky roof and problems with the foundation, you don't worry about the Ferrari in the driveway. You sell the Ferrari to fix the house. So, Steve, give us your take on the Rangers, but also you said you had a better analogy than this current one.
Yeah, this isn't really for the Rangers, but it could be for other teams like Vancouver right now who are sort of doing rebuilds out of the blue. It just seems like only in hockey right now does an arsonist turn around to the homeowner and hand out a business card and say, I build houses too. Like we're talking about management groups that have erred significantly. And again, not necessarily just the Rangers here, but you look at Vancouver as well, where, taking a step back, like GMs like Chris Drury and Jim Rutherford, we saw this, they're paid millions of dollars a year to be the subject matter experts, to be the single source of truth, to be the smartest man or woman anywhere on where their clubs should be going. And part of being paid those millions of dollars a year is to know before anyone else, do I have a good team? Do I have a bad team? How do I position myself for the year to come? And we're talking right now about lists of players, the Vancouver context and the New York player context as well, who were signed to these, huge big ticket deals, often within the last calendar year. And now these clubs are completely repositioning themselves, saying, well, actually, we need to rebuild and retool and aim for the first overall pick. And the discussion seemed to always be like, okay, what do we do with player X or player Y? But the bigger discussion is like, how do these groups, and it's not, it doesn't mean it's a problem of everyone in the group, but however that group is constructed right now without leadership, like why are the outputs either not reflecting the inputs, or why are the outputs just bad? And that's the bigger question. Like, where do these teams want to go? What is their vision? How do they want to look in 4 or 5 years? And how do they make the right decisions with the right people in their front office to get there? And I don't think we've heard answers. We didn't hear answers in the story letter. We didn't hear answers in one of the many Jim Rutherford press conferences about how we're going to do things radically differently than we've done them in the past. And until then, I don't think any of these little fixes are going to answer those questions or be like the magic medicine. Having said that, both these teams need to trade as many players as they can for as much draft capital or good futures as they can get.
Can I ask you a quick question, Steve?
Yeah.
So, I don't want to absolve either of these management groups from blame because they've made bad free agent deals, they've made bad draft picks. Like the process is clearly broken for both of these teams. But sometimes, and I feel like both these teams also have similar like strong ownership groups, and sometimes like that then reflects on the moves that they're making when maybe the most hockey sense decision is to kind of break it down and rebuild, but they have, revenue goals and they have to sell tickets and they have to sell merchandise. And so like sometimes that comes into the fold and ownership kind of forces a move that these teams wouldn't agree with. So from your side of things too, like being on that side, like how much is that a battle between managing ownership expectations and not letting them make the decisions that are, better short-term fixes, but long-term going to cause these massive problems?
Yeah, again, like that's what the money's for, right? Like managing up is a skill, managing up is hard. CEOs sometimes report to board of directors who are difficult. It's part of the job. It doesn't help. We know lots of owners, and I think we saw an NFL owner who also owns an NHL team this week do a presser that probably raised some red flags about how tough it might be to work in that environment or not.
Possibly Buffalo. I'm not going to confirm or deny.
Maybe, but like that's not the answer. And listen, I've been there. I remember when I started working in Florida, when Vinny Viola bought the Panthers and inherited a general manager who he knew wasn't the long-term answer, but who was sort of part of the Jim Rutherford mold of the old boys clubs who have lots of media connections. And like the easy thing to reach for if you're a manager who's struggling is to call up your media buddies and say, man, this owner is tough. Man, we need an ownership change. Man, this owner's intervening. And oftentimes it's the opposite. Oftentimes it's an ownership group who says, hey, listen, I can tell looking on the inside that things aren't going the way they should. But I can't make a regime change right now, but I'm pushing for some incremental changes, and that creates fear and uncertainty. So it's not always like absolving, and certainly in both those contexts, like, you've heard stories of those owners being tougher. But I think you rarely see an owner saying like, the answer is this particular veteran with this much term, with this much trade protection right now. That is almost always the general manager making that decision. It might be the owner saying like, you can't move anyone, or we don't want to do a rebuild. But it's rarely like, we want to sign a bunch of veterans and it has to be these ones, right, to these accounts with this trade protection. So, ownership.
They'll give general direction, but they won't like make you make that player versus that player is kind of what you're saying. Like there's generally saying don't throw in the towel, but like you don't have to sign these groups of veterans. Like you could do whatever you want.
Yeah, I mean, the 10,000 foot comment is like good managers can manage up better than bad managers can and achieve different results. So the same difficult owner with two radically different managers, you're going to see two different teams. So it's tough. But to your question, like we also sometimes forget like these teams are like living trees, so to speak. And so who you inherit, not just as an owner, but the contracts you inherit and the trades you inherit, the draft capital you inherit is a big thing. And when you come in as a GM and your prior regime has traded a bunch of picks, or traded a bunch of good young players, that certainly makes your job much, much harder too. You always have to keep that in mind. So,
I don't think that happened for the Rangers though. If you take a look at what Jeff Gorton was able to leave Chris Drury behind and what he's been able to do in Montreal, like you actually kind of argue that he left him in a pretty good spot.
Yeah, I think Jeff did a great job in New York, in Boston, in Montreal. I think he's a pretty sharp guy, and yeah, listen, there's always unforeseen things that pop up, but to answer the original question, I think the move is, Vince Trocheck, I have his old 6-year deal from Florida somewhere in one I count is behind me, like great player. I think every team would probably be happy to have him on a good contract.
little bit of a down year this year for Trocheck, but like last year and the year prior, like he was a really strong player for the Rangers teams that were making deep playoff runs.
Yeah, so I think you can monetize Vince. I think you want to do right by him and send him somewhere appropriate, given what he's given to that organization. But he should, bring back, more than what Kiefer Sherwood did, arguably. And those assets are super valuable. And maybe down the road, you might have to, package some of those features with other big ticket veteran contracts. But that's just the medicine you need to take. But honestly, like if you're the Rangers right now, I think your mental model is we need to aim for the first overall pick because we're not going to be a playoff team. And if we are, we're getting bounced. So there's no value with a veteran core and sort of competing for 10th place. But there's a ton of value in adding another, high-end pick or two.
Yeah, and I think for the Rangers, like the obvious moves that they're going to make is like they're going to trade Panarin and they're going to try and get rid of their pending UFAs and their RFAs that they don't see for the long-term future. But if they actually kind of mean what they're saying, then like you will see guys like Vincent Trocheck and Alexis Lafreniere like possibly on the move or flip for a bunch of different pieces that kind of really reshape this group. And like, maybe some wild cards, like maybe Mika kind of gets brought to see if he's interested in waiving, or even Adam Fox, right? Like they could get an absolute haul if they really want to tear it down to the studs. I don't think that's the direction they're going to go, but like it will be interesting to see how this plays out for the Rangers, not just at the trade deadline, but maybe in the offseason as well.
Yeah, it's not a short-term fix when you have players with term and you're trying to move on the fly, and some teams are in the playoffs and some aren't. July is a much better time usually than January to make those deals. And, like we said at the outset, it's a big long-term project with lots of big questions. And they need to get cracking on it though.
Yeah, speaking of playoffs, let us dive into our next topic here. And I just want to talk about this quick, and that's the playoff salary cap that is brand new to the CBA this season, in an attempt to prevent cap circumvention using LTIR from some of the teams, Vegas, Tampa Bay, Chicago, when Patrick Kane was hurt. And so I just want to talk about this quick, just kind of give a rundown quick of the rules, but then also get your take on it, on how you think teams are going to approach, the trade deadline, and then like when they're actually in the playoffs, how they're going to kind of manage these rosters. So basically, it's the 20-man roster that'll count against that $95.5 million salary cap. So the 20 players who are dressed for the game. Performance and games played bonuses do not count towards that cap number. The interesting one that I found here is that cap hits and acquired retention is not prorated. However, the retaining team's cap hit is prorated. So, and most of the teams that are retaining generally aren't playoff teams. So it should impact them less. But like for Rasmus Andersson, like it didn't matter if he got traded when he got traded or at the trade deadline. Like the retention is still going to be that 50%, that $2.275 million. It's not going to be like, based off of when he was traded. Dead cap still counts. So buyouts, buried salary, retained salary. So basically my question is to you, like, how do you think teams are going to make at the end of the day, maybe we add this player knowing we can't field our full like max lineup, but maybe he's a nice piece and we'll have to scratch some guys and figure it out. I saw some teams might be, starting their or putting in their third goalie as the backup, and their backup goalie who makes, $2-3 million might be scratched just so they can save more cap. So I'm interested, like, as your take from a management perspective, how do you think teams are going to manage this new rule in the CBA?
I think the one-word answer is cautiously. NHL is a caught-out league. I think teams aren't going to do something wild and crazy. Playoff roster system, like academically, yeah, it makes sense. Throw your third stringer in the lineup if your backup makes $6 million a year and he's not starting that night, and add in a player who you might otherwise not be able to fit in who you need. That's a great plan until your starter gets hurt in the first period and your family is up in arms that you lost a playoff game because of some tricky accounting you tried to do to put in the third line, right? And that happens once. And you see everyone talking about how it's not going to happen again. Having said that, it's a good idea. If you have back-to-back games in the playoffs, which happen rarely, if at all, anymore.
Yeah, I don't think that happens.
That scenario would work, I guess. But yeah, like you hit on the accounting changes with retained salary. That just goes to why a team like Vegas will add an Andersson earlier, because you can win games now and you don't add him. Like I've been on, in the old rules, we did that where we would say, okay, we can add this guy at the deadline and he'll only count for this much cap space and this much cash. Let's wait. that comes off the table now, which I think helps players who want to go to contenders.
It still works for the regular season part, but it's just the playoff cap where that doesn't work. So like the actual cash you owe would be less at the deadline. But yeah, to your point, like it has no impact on the playoffs.
Yeah, and for the playoff cap, I mean,
yeah.
I think it's possible you'll run into that situation where you have certain teams who have very expensive veteran players who have very minimal rules, and they might be sort of a marginal decision: do we scratch them or not? And sure, this rule change might tilt them to scratching them if they can add in, maybe 2 players making a little bit less. But you need that use case to be there. And you cannot lose your room by doing it. But it's something to keep in mind. And at some point, we'll see something interesting and creative. I'm just a little skeptical it'll happen right away as opposed to sort of in baby steps.
Yeah, exactly. We'll see how it plays out this year. Teams are going to deal with injuries and they're going to have to navigate that. And you'll see teams aren't necessarily rushing to put guys on season-ending LTIR until they absolutely are 100% ruled out for the season. You look at like a team like Dallas with Sagan or Florida with Barkov right now, they're just on normal LTIR. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out at the deadline. Let us wrap up this episode, Steve. You can get in on the action today. Stay cool, bet responsibly, puckpedia.com/coolbet. So, Steve, why don't you give us just what are you thinking around the league? I think one team you possibly wanted to talk about was the Seattle Kraken. But why don't you kind of dive in and just give us Steve's world and let us know what's going on with your brain and the NHL?
Let's pivot from the Kraken for a sec. I don't know. One thing I was thinking about the last couple of days, and I'll sort of bring together 3 very disparate thoughts into one. But 3 things sort of we've seen lately. One, we just saw Jason and Nick Robertson switch agencies, which is something that seems to be happening more recently than in the past.
Yep. They just went from CAA to Octagon with Andy Scott.
Yeah, so that's one. 2, we saw Linus Ullmark in this great interview with Claire Hanna.
Awesome interview.
Right, come out and say one of the reasons why hockey players like me speak less and show our personalities less is because of this risk of just massive, I don't even know what the word is, but just
bullshit.
There you go. Of just our lives being thrown into upheaval by internet trolls, I think was what Steve Staios called them, and rightfully so. And then the third one is, if you're a football fan, you've seen this coaching carousel going on this week where
John Harbaugh to the Giants. Love that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you see these assistant coach candidates who have these beautiful videos put together on their behalf by showing their grandmother and everyone they've ever played for, coached with. And each one of them looks like the next Vince Lombardi. And those sound like 3 random thoughts. And where I'm going with this is, I wonder if we see with this rising salary cap in the NHL and players making more than ever before, some disruption in the agency business with what's happening, jumping off of what we saw with the Robertsons. Historically, we've had this model where typically you have these bird dogs hanging out at 12-year-old AAA games and recruiting players and then advising them and then eventually funneling them up to big dogs at an agency who end up taking millions of dollars off their one big contract off a couple phone calls or so, and that's the be all and end all. And I just wonder with A, players switching more often like the Robertsons, B, this younger generation like the Celebrities who are so social media savvy, so mindful of their image, and what Linus Ullmark said about how important having someone who can make sure your image is taken care of is critical, personally and professionally. Do we see some upstart agencies in the next couple of years who come in and say, hey, we're younger, we're more progressive, we're going to really work with you as a player on your personality and your social media and how that's projected outwards, because that creates business opportunities and otherwise, but also maybe a slightly different model in terms of saying, hey, maybe you don't need to pay 4 to 5% of that $100 billion on a negotiation. Maybe it makes sense to switch around as opposed to going to the dance with whoever first met you when you were 12. Just a thought, but watching how creative these NFL agents get, and seeing what Lena said, and again seeing Robertson and other players move, curiosity. I think the influx of massive money always has effects that we don't see coming, and that's certainly coming down the pipeline in the league right now with these massive new contracts. So curious to see where that one goes. Seattle interests me a little bit because they've sort of oscillated a little in the last few weeks. It sounds like, at least, between buying and selling. They've been sort of outside the playoff bubble. They've been in it. I think there was a report yesterday they might look at exploring Shane Wright. So yeah, curious where they go. They have a smart front office. Also curious if they, are not totally married to, being buyers and going all in. Do they potentially move a player like Jared McCann, who has 1 year left? 30-goal scorer, good cap hit. I think
great player. I think he's a player a lot of teams will covet at this point.
Yeah, and so I wonder about him. I think there's always a need for centers, right, as well. And so, yeah, maybe team to watch and a couple players who might be on the move.
Yeah, that's all super interesting thoughts, Steve. The agent point, I have a question about that. So do you basically think that like more kind of maybe these upstart agencies will be more like, not just the contract side of things, but also like building the brand and the social media and the business?
Exactly. And you see that a little bit in the women's game right now too, even in hockey. But I think, historically, a lot of agents have said, we'll do your player work and, you can do your marketing work elsewhere. And some don't. There's some big ones out there that don't do that at all, but some that still do. And I think a shift potentially to, are there some upstarts that say, hey, we're a new agency. We have some managers and some folks who are, more your peers. And we're really going to be hyper-focused on all of these things to manage you professionally. And we're also going to do your contract work. And we'll do it as well as anyone. And we'll have people in here who are, as capable and as connected, but not think secondarily about all those things. And, I just think about that because you see some agents, last few months who will have a young player sign. They'll be like, hey, now we have the players branded new merchandise. And it'll be like their image photoshopped on a, cheap Hanes t-shirt. It's like, you can do better. Right. And they're doing better with women's players, and they're doing better in other sports. We're doing things differently. And I think it was, McKenna, who signed with Barstool a few weeks ago. You're just sort of seeing that shift.
He just had an NIL deal with Barstool.
Yeah, and that NIL deal is going to change things, I think, seismically, where players are going to be used to really big endorsement opportunities, really selling their image and their personality, and they're going to expect to have that representation, sort of throughout their careers, and just things changing as the faces of the game become younger, with the Bedards and Celebrini sort of being massive game changers and franchise top elite players in years 2 and 3. They might drive those changes.
Yeah, exactly. And shout out to the Barstool guys and the Spit and Chiclet guys for getting that done. I know Grinelli's been talking a lot about this deal. Looks like a lot of like merchandise kind of is like the general sense of it, but Gavin McKenna also is CAA guy. So interesting to see like, a bigger brand like CAA, but maybe he's doing that kind of on his own outside of CAA, or maybe they're even helping him with it, but it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out in the near future. But Steve, this has been awesome. Any final words before we end the show today?
No, I think we're good. Thanks for having me on, Keith.
Perfect. Thank you for coming on. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube page where you get all this good content. We just had Mike Kelly on the most recent PuckPedia Hockey Show episode. We were getting real nerdy with all the hockey analytics and the numbers. So definitely get on the YouTube, subscribe, watch the episodes, and follow along. That's all the time we have for you. Thanks for joining in.
PuckPedia.com